What happens when 301 of the world's most elite warriors meet someone who refuses to be broken? What happens when years of training, discipline, and raw determination collide with prejudice, doubt, and the crushing weight of tradition? This isn't just another story about overcoming odds. This is about a moment that shattered every assumption, challenged every belief, and proved that true strength doesn't come from size, gender, or expectations. It comes from something far deeper, something that can't be taught in any training manual or measured by any standard test. In a world where being underestimated can be your greatest weapon, where silence speaks louder than words, and where a single moment can redefine everything people thought they knew about limits, one person stood alone against an entire system designed to break them. They thought they knew what strength looked like. They thought they understood what it meant to be undefeatable. They were wrong. This is the story of someone who turned their greatest disadvantage into their most powerful advantage, who transformed doubt into determination, and who proved that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one everyone thinks they can easily defeat. Prepare yourself for a journey that will challenge everything you believe about human potential, about the power of the human spirit, and about what it truly means to be unstoppable. Sara Martinez never intended to become a legend. Growing up in a small town in New Mexico, she was the kind of person people barely noticed. Average height, quiet demeanor, always choosing books over sports, preferring solitude to crowds. Her childhood was marked by constant underestimation, from teachers who overlooked her in class to classmates who picked her last for every team. But what they couldn't see was the fire burning inside her, a determination forged by years of being dismissed and ignored. Her father, Miguel Martinez, was a retired Marine who ran a small auto repair shop. He never pushed military life on his daughter, but he did instill in her something far more valuable, the understanding that real strength wasn't about what others could see on the surface. Mija, he would tell her while they worked together under the hood of an old Chevy, the strongest engines don't always make the most noise. Sometimes the quietest ones are the ones that never break down. Sara's mother, Elena, was a nurse who worked double shifts at the local hospital. She taught Sara about resilience in a different way. Through watching her care for others despite her own exhaustion, through seeing her remain gentle and compassionate even after the hardest days. From her mother, Sara learned that true toughness meant staying soft in a hard world, that real courage was about protecting others even when you felt like you needed protection yourself. The Martinez family wasn't wealthy. They lived in a modest house where every dollar was carefully counted, where luxury meant pizza on Friday nights and new school clothes once a year. But what they lacked in material possessions, they made up for in values. Hard work, integrity, and the belief that anyone could overcome anything if they were willing to put in the effort. These were the foundations upon which Sara built her character. School wasn't easy for Sara. She was smart, but not in the flashy way that got you noticed. She did her homework, earned good grades, and stayed out of trouble, but she was practically invisible to most of her peers. She wasn't athletic, wasn't particularly social, and didn't fit into any of the established cliques. She spent lunch periods reading in the library, afternoons helping her father in the shop, and evenings studying at the kitchen table. The bullying started in middle school. It wasn't dramatic or violent. It was the subtle, persistent kind that slowly chips away at your confidence. Whispered comments about her worn-out clothes, deliberate exclusion from group activities, the kind of social cruelty that leaves no visible marks, but creates deep wounds. Sara never complained to her parents about it. She simply absorbed it, learning to build walls around her heart while keeping her spirit intact. But something unexpected happened during her sophomore year of high school. Sara discovered martial arts through a self-defense class her school offered as part of their physical education program. The instructor, Mrs. Chun, was a former competitive martial artist who saw something in Sara that others had missed. "You have good balance," she told Sara after the first class. "And, more importantly, you pay attention. Most people think fighting is about being aggressive, but real fighting is about being smart." Sara threw herself into learning everything she could about self-defense, then martial arts, then combat techniques. She practiced forms in her backyard, studied videos online, and begged her parents for permission to join the local dojo. When they couldn't afford the monthly fees, she worked out a deal to clean the facility in exchange for lessons. She arrived early, stayed late, and absorbed every technique, every philosophy, every lesson like a sponge. The other students at the dojo initially dismissed her just like everyone else had. She was small, quiet, and didn't look like someone who could hurt a fly. But Master Kim, the elderly Korean man who owned the school, recognized something special in her approach. Fighting is not about anger, he would tell his students. Fighting is about understanding. Sarah understands. For 3 years, Sarah trained with an intensity that surprised everyone, including herself. She learned taekwondo, jiu-jitsu, boxing, and mixed martial arts techniques. She studied the science behind leverage, the psychology of conflict, and the philosophy of self-control. But more than anything, she learned about herself, about the depth of her determination, about her ability to endure, and about the quiet confidence that came from knowing she could handle whatever life threw at her. Her transformation wasn't visible to most people. She still dressed modestly, still kept to herself, still preferred books to parties. But inside, she had become something different. She had discovered that years of being underestimated had given her an incredible advantage. People never saw her coming. She learned to use their assumptions against them, to let them think they knew what she was capable of while she quietly prepared for anything. The bullying at school gradually stopped, not because Sarah became aggressive or confrontational, but because she carried herself differently. There was a calm confidence in her movements, a steadiness in her voice, a quality that made people think twice about testing her. She never had to use her skills. The mere possibility that she might was enough. College brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. Sarah earned a partial scholarship to study criminal justice at a state university, where she continued her martial arts training while maintaining perfect grades. She worked part-time jobs to help pay for school, sending money home when she could, never complaining about the long hours or the exhaustion. It was during her junior year that she first heard about women being allowed to attempt special forces training. The announcement was met with skepticism, jokes, and outright hostility from many quarters. Most people assumed it was a publicity stunt, a way for the military to appear progressive without actually changing anything. The physical standards were the same as for men, the training was notoriously brutal, and the failure rate was astronomical even for elite male candidates. Sarah read every article she could find about the announcement. She researched the training requirements, studied the physical standards, and learned about the history of special forces selection. What she discovered was that the program wasn't just about physical strength. It required mental toughness, strategic thinking, emotional control, and the ability to function under extreme stress. These were areas where her years of being overlooked and underestimated had actually prepared her better than traditional athletic training might have. She began preparing immediately, even though she hadn't yet decided to apply. She increased her training intensity, added endurance work to her routine, and began studying military tactics and strategy. She ran before dawn, trained during lunch breaks, and spent evenings learning everything she could about what the selection process would entail. Her parents were supportive, but worried. They knew their daughter was capable of extraordinary things, but they also understood the magnitude of what she was considering. If this is what you want, her father told her one evening as they worked on his truck, then you have to commit completely. No half measures, no backup plans. You go all in, or you don't go at all. Sarah's college professors tried to discourage her. You're too smart for the military, one told her. You could have a great career in law enforcement or federal agencies. Why risk everything on something so unlikely to succeed? But Sarah had learned long ago that other people's limitations didn't have to become her limitations. She had spent her entire life proving that assumptions about what she could and couldn't do were usually wrong. The application process was extensive and intimidating. Psychological evaluations, physical fitness tests, background checks, and interviews with military personnel who clearly had doubts about the entire experiment of allowing women into special forces. Sarah approached each step with the same methodical preparation she had brought to everything else in her life. She studied, practiced, and prepared as if her life depended on it, because in many ways, it did. When the acceptance letter arrived, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror that she had never experienced before. She had been selected for the preliminary training program, the first step in a process that would either prove she belonged among the elite or demonstrate the futility of the entire endeavor. Either way, she would finally get the chance to show what she was truly capable of. The night before she left for training, Sarah sat in her childhood bedroom, looking at the trophies from martial arts competitions, the certificates from academic achievements, and the photos of family moments that had shaped her into who she had become. Tomorrow, She would enter a world where everything she thought she knew about herself would be tested. She would face challenges designed to break the strongest people, endure hardships that had defeated seasoned warriors, and prove herself in an environment where failure was not just possible, but expected. But as she packed her few possessions and prepared for the journey ahead, Sarah Martinez felt something she had never experienced before, the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment without even knowing it. Every dismissive comment, every underestimation, every moment of doubt had forged her into someone who couldn't be broken by external pressure because she had already survived internal storms. She was ready. The training facility looked like something designed to break human spirits. Sprawling across hundreds of acres of unforgiving terrain, it featured obstacle courses that seemed impossible to complete, training areas that looked more like torture chambers, and an atmosphere of barely controlled chaos that hit Sarah like a physical wall the moment she stepped off the transport bus. She wasn't alone. There were 12 other women in her group, and they all carried themselves with the kind of confidence that came from athletic achievement and military success. Former college athletes, current military personnel with distinguished service records, and women who had already proven themselves in combat situations. Sarah looked around at her fellow candidates and felt the familiar sensation of being the least impressive person in the room. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was their first instructor, a compact man with scars on his hands and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. "Ladies," he announced to the group as they stood at attention in the pre-dawn darkness, "you are here because someone, somewhere, thinks you might have what it takes to earn a place among the most elite warriors in the world. I'm here to prove that person wrong." The first week was designed to establish baselines and eliminate the obviously unprepared. Physical fitness tests that pushed everyone to their limits, psychological evaluations that probed for weaknesses, and academic assessments that covered everything from tactical theory to medical training. Sarah watched as 3 of her fellow candidates were eliminated before the first weekend, sent home with polite explanations about not meeting the minimum standards. What surprised everyone, including the instructors, was how consistently Sarah performed in the middle of every assessment. She wasn't the fastest runner, but she finished every run. She wasn't the strongest on the weight tests, but she completed every rep. She didn't score the highest on the academic portions, but she never fell below the passing threshold. In a program designed to identify the exceptional, Sarah appeared to be determinately average. This apparent mediocrity frustrated some of the instructors and amused others. During his evaluation of the first week's performance, Master Chief Peterson noted, "Martinez is either hiding something, or she's exactly what she appears to be. Someone who has no business being here, but somehow keeps meeting the minimum requirements." What they didn't understand was that Sarah was doing exactly what she had always done. She was surviving while others wore themselves out trying to excel. She had learned long ago that consistency was more valuable than brilliance, that endurance mattered more than peak performance, and that the person still standing at the end was usually the person who had paced themselves properly from the beginning. The second week introduced combat training, and this was where Sarah first began to distinguish herself. Hand-to-hand combat exercises revealed years of martial arts training that she had downplayed in her applications. When paired against candidates who outweighed her by 50 pounds or more, she consistently held her own through technique, timing, and an uncanny ability to read her opponent's intentions. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, the senior combat instructor, began paying closer attention to Sarah after she successfully defended herself against 3 consecutive opponents in a training exercise designed to simulate being outnumbered. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" he asked her afterward. "My hometown dojo," Sarah replied simply. Master Kim always said that size was just one factor in a fight, and usually not the most important one. Hayes made a note in his evaluation. "Martinez appears to have significant combat skills that weren't apparent in her initial assessments. Recommend closer observation." The third week introduced the infamous obstacle course that had broken countless candidates over the years. Known unofficially as the Eliminator, it featured walls that seemed impossibly high, rope climbs that tested not just strength but courage, and mud crawls that left even the strongest candidates gasping for breath. The course had to be completed within a specific time limit, and failure meant immediate dismissal from the program. Sarah studied the course for hours before attempting it, watching other candidates struggle with various obstacles and noting where technique could compensate for raw power. When her turn came, She approached each challenge methodically, using momentum and leverage where others relied on brute force, finding handholds and footholds that others missed, and maintaining a steady pace while others sprinted and then crashed. She finished with 30 seconds to spare, not the fastest time, but well within the acceptable range. More importantly, she finished looking like she could run the course again immediately if required. Several candidates who had posted faster times were lying in the mud, completely exhausted from their efforts. The instructors began to notice a pattern. Sara Martinez might not be the most physically gifted candidate, but she had an unusual combination of mental toughness, technical skill, and strategic thinking that allowed her to succeed where others failed. She approached every challenge like a problem to be solved rather than a test to be dominated. Week 4 brought psychological pressure that was designed to break down mental defenses and reveal character flaws. Sleep deprivation, constant stress, verbal harassment from instructors, and impossible deadlines for complex tasks. This was where many of the most physically gifted candidates finally cracked. Elite athletes who had never experienced failure suddenly found themselves unable to cope with constant criticism and unattainable standards. Sara thrived in this environment in a way that surprised everyone, including herself. The verbal harassment rolled off her like water because she had survived years of subtle bullying in school. The sleep deprivation was manageable because she had worked multiple jobs while maintaining perfect grades in college. The impossible deadlines felt familiar because she had spent her entire life being expected to do more with less. While other candidates argued with instructors, complained about unfairness, or demanded respect based on their previous achievements, Sara simply absorbed everything and kept moving forward. She had learned long ago that fighting against unfairness was often less effective than working around it. Master Chief Peterson updated his assessment. Martinez demonstrates unusual psychological resilience. She appears immune to the pressure tactics that have eliminated several other candidates. Beginning to suspect she may be more capable than initially assessed. The 5th week introduced live-fire exercises and advanced tactical training. This was traditionally where the gap between military-experienced candidates and civilians became most apparent. Sara had never served in the military, never handled military-grade weapons in combat situations, and had no experience with squad-level tactics. She should have struggled. Instead, she approached the new challenges with the same methodical learning style she had applied to everything else. She listened carefully to instructions, practiced meticulously during breaks, and asked targeted questions that demonstrated her commitment to mastering the material. While other candidates focused on looking competent, Sara focused on actually becoming competent. Her marksmanship scores were consistently above average. Her tactical understanding developed rapidly. Her ability to function as part of a team while maintaining individual excellence impressed instructors who had seen too many candidates excel individually while failing in group settings. But it was during a night navigation exercise that Sara first demonstrated something that made the instructors take serious notice. The exercise involved finding a series of checkpoints in total darkness using only a map and compass while avoiding enemy patrols played by advanced students. Most candidates either moved too quickly and made noise that gave away their positions, or moved so cautiously that they failed to reach all checkpoints within the time limit. Sara completed the course in the second fastest time while remaining completely undetected by the patrol teams. When asked about her technique, she explained that she had spent the previous evening studying topographical maps and identifying the optimal routes, then memorized key landmarks that would allow her to navigate efficiently in darkness. She thinks like a professional, Hayes noted in his report. Not like someone trying to prove herself, but like someone who already knows she belongs here and is simply executing her mission. By the end of the 5th week, 8 of the original 13 candidates remained, and Sara was no longer seen as the weakest link. The instructors had begun referring to her as the dark horse, the candidate nobody expected to succeed, but who kept surprising everyone with her competence and consistency. More importantly, Sara had begun to understand something about herself that she had never fully grasped before. She wasn't trying to prove she could do what men could do. She was proving that she could do things differently and achieve the same results. Her approach to challenges was fundamentally different from most of her fellow candidates, but it was also fundamentally effective. The 6th week would introduce the final phase of preliminary training, where the remaining candidates would face the most difficult challenges yet. But for the first time since arriving at the facility, Sara felt something she had rarely experienced in her life, The confidence that came from knowing she wasn't just surviving, but actually excelling in her own unique way. She was no longer the quiet girl from New Mexico who was just hoping to prove she deserved to be there. She was becoming something new, a warrior who fought with intelligence instead of aggression, who succeeded through persistence instead of power, and who had learned to turn every perceived weakness into an unexpected advantage. The instructors had stopped questioning whether she belonged in the program. Now they were beginning to wonder just how far she might go. The 6th week of training began with an announcement that changed everything. Colonel Thompson, the program director, addressed the remaining 8 candidates with the kind of serious demeanor that made everyone stand straighter. From this point forward, you will be training alongside active Navy SEAL candidates in their final phase of preparation. This is not an experiment. This is not a publicity stunt. You will be held to the same standards, face the same challenges, and be evaluated by the same criteria. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as she realized what this meant. Up until now, they had been in a specialized program designed specifically for women attempting Special Forces training. Now they would be thrown into an environment where they would be vastly outnumbered, constantly scrutinized, and expected to prove themselves among men who had already survived months of the most brutal military training in the world. The integration happened immediately. The 8 remaining women were dispersed among different training groups, with no more than 2 assigned to any single unit. Sarah found herself assigned to Bravo Company, a group of 43 male Navy SEAL candidates who had been training together for 6 months and had developed the kind of tight bonds that come from shared suffering and mutual dependence. The reaction to her arrival was mixed and mostly silent. Some candidates offered polite nods of acknowledgement. Others stared with barely concealed skepticism. A few exchanged glances that clearly communicated their doubt about whether any woman could meet the physical and mental demands of what lay ahead. None of them were openly hostile, but none of them seemed particularly welcoming either. Petty Officer First Class Jackson, their lead instructor, introduced Sarah to the group with characteristic bluntness. "This is Martinez. She's here because she's earned the right to be here, same as all of you. She'll succeed or fail based on her performance, not your opinions about whether she should be here. Anyone who has a problem with that can discuss it with me privately." The first day of integrated training was a 20-mile ruck march carrying full equipment loads through mountainous terrain. Sarah had prepared for this by gradually increasing her pack weight during training, but carrying 65 pounds of gear over rough terrain for 6 hours was still the most physically demanding thing she had ever attempted. She started in the middle of the formation and watched carefully as the pace settled into a sustainable rhythm. The SEAL candidates moved with practiced efficiency, conserving energy while maintaining speed, adjusting their gear to minimize discomfort, and supporting each other through subtle encouragement and shared resource management. By the halfway point, 3 candidates had fallen behind the main group. Sarah wasn't among them, but she wasn't comfortable either. The weight of the pack was causing pain in her shoulders that radiated down her arms, and the pace was fast enough that she had to focus completely on maintaining position in the formation. It was during the final 5 miles that something happened that would define the rest of her training experience. One of the candidates who had been struggling, a powerfully built former college football player named Peterson, stumbled and went down hard, twisting his ankle severely enough that he couldn't put weight on it. The standing orders were clear. No candidate could be left behind, and the mission had to be completed within the time limit. Without hesitation, 3 of the other candidates moved to assist Peterson, redistributing his gear and creating a support system that would allow him to continue. But even with help, the injured candidate was slowing the entire group to a pace that would result in everyone failing the time requirement. Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She approached the group supporting Peterson and quietly offered to carry additional weight from his pack. "I can handle it," she said simply when they looked at her with skepticism. Candidate Miller, a former Marine who had been one of the more vocal skeptics about women in the program, shook his head. "You're already carrying a full load. Taking more weight isn't going to help anyone if you end up falling behind too." "I won't fall behind," Sarah replied with quiet confidence. Before anyone could protest further, she had redistributed 20 pounds of Peterson's gear into her own pack and was moving back into formation. For the final 5 miles, Sarah carried 85 pounds of equipment while maintaining the pace necessary to bring the entire group in under the time limit. She didn't complain, didn't ask for help, and didn't show any signs of the exhaustion that was threatening to overwhelm her. When they crossed the finish line with 4 minutes to spare, she was still in position and still moving steadily. The group's attitude toward her began to shift that day. Miller was the first to acknowledge what she had done, approaching her after the debrief to say, "That was good leadership back there. Thanks for stepping up." Others followed with similar acknowledgments, and, for the first time, Sarah felt like she was being accepted as a teammate rather than tolerated as an outsider. But acceptance brought new challenges. The SEAL candidates had developed a culture of brutal honesty and constant testing that was designed to identify weaknesses before they became fatal flaws in combat. They pushed each other relentlessly, critiqued performance mercilessly, and demanded excellence in every aspect of training. Sarah found herself subjected to the same treatment, and, initially, it was overwhelming. Her marksmanship was adequate, but not exceptional. Her swimming technique was functional, but inefficient. Her tactical understanding was developing, but incomplete. Every day brought detailed feedback about areas where she needed improvement, delivered with the kind of directness that would have devastated her high school self. But something remarkable happened as she adapted to this environment. Instead of becoming defensive or discouraged, Sarah began to absorb the criticism and use it to improve at a rate that impressed everyone, including her harshest critics. She spent extra time at the shooting range until her marksmanship scores improved from adequate to excellent. She worked with the best swimmers in the group until her technique became efficient enough to meet the program's demanding standards. Most importantly, she began to contribute her own expertise to the group's collective knowledge. Her background in martial arts proved invaluable during hand-to-hand combat training, where she was able to teach techniques that even experienced military personnel hadn't encountered. Her analytical approach to problem-solving helped the group develop more effective strategies for complex tactical scenarios. The seventh week introduced urban warfare training, where teams had to clear buildings, neutralize threats, and rescue hostages in simulated city environments. This training was conducted with live ammunition and explosive devices, raising the stakes to a level where mistakes could result in serious injury or death. Sarah was assigned to a 4-person team with Miller, Thompson, a former Army Ranger, and Gwynn, a Navy electronics specialist. Their first mission was to clear a multi-story building where armed instructors playing terrorist roles had taken civilian volunteers as hostages. The scenario was designed to test not just tactical skills, but decision-making under extreme pressure. The team spent 2 hours studying building layouts, developing entry strategies, and rehearsing their movements. Sarah's role was to provide overwatch and communications support while the other team members conducted the direct assault. It should have been a relatively straightforward mission for a group with their training and experience. Everything went wrong from the moment they breached the building. The layout was different from their briefings. The terrorists had prepared unexpected defensive positions, and the communications equipment malfunctioned within the first few minutes. Thompson was killed by simulated gunfire during the initial entry, leaving the team shorthanded and operating without their most experienced combat leader. Miller took command and attempted to continue the original plan, but it quickly became apparent that they needed to adapt to the changed circumstances. Sarah, observing from her overwatch position, identified movement patterns that suggested the instructors were rotating between defensive positions according to a predictable schedule. She made a decision that violated standard protocol, but potentially saved the mission. Abandoning her assigned position, she moved to a different vantage point where she could provide both tactical intelligence and direct fire support. Using hand signals to communicate with her remaining teammates, she coordinated a modified assault plan that took advantage of the defensive rotation she had identified. The mission was completed successfully, with all hostages rescued and all threats neutralized within the time limit. But Sarah knew she would face serious questions about her decision to abandon her assigned position without explicit orders from her team leader. During the debrief, Instructor Reynolds questioned every decision the team had made, paying particular attention to Sarah's unauthorized movement. "Martinez, explain your decision to leave your assigned position." Sarah had learned from watching her teammates that honesty and tactical justification were valued more than rigid adherence to orders. The original plan was compromised when Thompson was eliminated and communications failed. From my assigned position, I could see that the instructors were moving in a pattern that created a tactical opportunity, but I couldn't exploit it without repositioning. I made the decision to prioritize mission success over protocol compliance. Reynolds studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Your assessment was correct, and your execution was effective. However, Abandoning your position without team leader authorization is a serious breach of protocol. In a real combat situation, that decision could have gotten your teammates killed if your assessment had been wrong. Understood, sir. In future situations, I'll find a way to communicate my observations to the team leader before taking independent action. Good. That's what learning looks like. Reynolds turned to Miller. Team leader's assessment of Martinez's performance? Miller's response surprised everyone in the room. She saved the mission. Her tactical observation and adaptability turned a failing operation into a successful one. I should have been more receptive to her input during the planning phase. For Sarah, this represented a fundamental shift in how she was perceived by her teammates. She was no longer the woman trying to prove she belonged. She was a valued team member whose unique perspective and skills contributed to the group's overall effectiveness. The 8th week brought the culmination exercise, a 72-hour continuous operation that combined every skill they had learned into a single, comprehensive test. Teams had to navigate through enemy territory, conduct surveillance, execute multiple tactical operations, and extract to safety while being actively hunted by instructor teams with superior equipment and knowledge of the terrain. Sarah's team was assigned one of the most challenging routes, crossing mountainous terrain at night, conducting daylight surveillance of a heavily defended compound, and then executing a raid to capture high-value targets before escaping through a different route to reach their extraction point. The mission began badly when their insertion went wrong, and they found themselves 2 miles off course in unfamiliar terrain. Rather than panic or attempt to rush to their intended starting point, Sarah suggested they use their current position as an advantage, approaching their target from an unexpected direction that might catch the defending instructors off guard. Her suggestion proved correct. The team was able to approach the compound undetected, gather the required intelligence, and execute their raid with precision. But the extraction phase brought new challenges when they discovered that the instructors had anticipated their planned escape route and prepared an ambush. With limited ammunition and no way to fight through the ambush, Sarah proposed an alternative that seemed impossible: a night movement through terrain so difficult that the instructors wouldn't expect anyone to attempt it. The route would require technical climbing skills, perfect navigation, and the ability to move silently through areas where a single mistake could result in a fatal fall. Her teammates trusted her judgment enough to attempt the route, and her assessment proved correct. They reached their extraction point with an hour to spare, having successfully completed every aspect of their mission while avoiding the carefully prepared traps that had caught several other teams. But more than mission success, Sarah had achieved something else during those 72 hours. She had stopped thinking of herself as an outsider trying to prove she deserved acceptance. She had become a confident, competent special operations candidate who happened to be a woman, rather than a woman trying to become a special operations candidate. The announcement came without warning on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Colonel Thompson gathered all remaining candidates in the main briefing room, his expression carrying the weight of something significant. Of the original 13 women who had started the program, only 3 remained: Sarah, Jennifer Walsh, a former Army officer, and Lisa Chun, a Marine Corps veteran. They had been training alongside the SEAL candidates for 6 weeks, and the integration had been largely successful. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Thompson began, his voice carrying across the silent room. In 72 hours, you will face the final evaluation exercise. This is not a training scenario. This is a comprehensive assessment that will determine whether you have earned the right to join the most elite fighting force in the world. The room remained absolutely silent as he continued. The exercise will simulate a hostage rescue operation in an urban environment. You will face live opposition from instructors and advanced candidates playing hostile roles. You will have access to live ammunition and explosive devices. The margin for error is 0, and the consequences of failure extend far beyond your personal careers. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as the full implications became clear. This wasn't just about whether she would succeed or fail. This was about whether the entire program of integrating women into special forces would be deemed successful or abandoned. The weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming. The exercise parameters are as follows, Thompson continued. Teams of 8 candidates will assault a compound where civilian hostages are being held by a superior force of well-trained, well-equipped opponents. The compound has been designed to maximize the defensive advantage, and the opposing force will be using every tactic at their disposal to prevent rescue of the hostages. He paused, letting the gravity of the situation settle on everyone present. Success will be measured not just by mission completion, but by tactical competence, leadership under pressure, and the ability to function as an integrated unit under the most extreme circumstances you will face in this program. The team assignments were announced immediately. Sarah found herself assigned to Team Alpha, along with 7 SEAL candidates she had been training with for the past 6 weeks. Miller would serve as team leader, with Sarah assigned as the communications specialist and secondary assault element. The other 2 women in the program were assigned to different teams, ensuring that each unit had female representation, but preventing any appearance that they were being segregated or given special consideration. The next 72 hours were consumed by intensive preparation. Teams studied satellite imagery of the compound, developed assault plans, rehearsed entry techniques, and prepared for every contingency they could imagine. The compound was a multi-story building complex surrounded by defensive barriers, with multiple entry points that could be either advantages or death traps, depending on how they were approached. Sarah threw herself into the planning process with the same methodical intensity she had applied to every challenge throughout the program. She memorized building layouts, studied the positioning of defensive barriers, and developed backup communications protocols that would function even if primary systems were compromised. More importantly, she contributed tactical insights that helped the team develop more effective assault strategies. During one planning session, she identified a potential weakness in the compound's design that the other team members had missed. The defensive barriers are positioned to channel attackers into killing zones at the main entrances, she explained, using satellite photos to illustrate her point. But the positioning creates blind spots here and here where a small team could potentially gain access without being detected. Miller studied her analysis carefully before nodding. That's good tactical thinking. How do we exploit those blind spots without exposing ourselves to crossfire from the secondary defensive positions? Sarah had already worked out the answer. We use a diversionary assault on the main entrance to draw attention and defensive resources away from the blind spots. While the majority of the defending force focuses on the primary threat, a smaller element uses the diversion to gain entry and begin clearing the building from an unexpected direction. The plan they developed was complex and risky, requiring precise timing and flawless execution. Sarah would accompany the diversionary assault team to provide communications support, then transition to the secondary assault when they breached the building. It was a role that required her to be in 2 of the most dangerous positions during the operation, but it also gave her the opportunity to prove her value to the mission's success. The night before the exercise, Sarah found herself unable to sleep. She lay in her bunk thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. From the quiet girl in New Mexico, who was constantly underestimated, to a special forces candidate preparing for the most important test of her life. Every challenge she had faced, every moment of doubt she had overcome, every person who had dismissed her potential had contributed to preparing her for this moment. She thought about her parents, who had supported her dream even when they didn't fully understand it. She thought about Master Kim, who had taught her that real strength came from within. She thought about her teammates, who had evolved from skeptics to allies to trusted partners who would depend on her performance in the morning. But, mostly, she thought about what failure would mean, not just for her personally, but for every woman who might follow in her footsteps. The program was experimental, and its future depended on the performance of the 3 women currently preparing for tomorrow's assessment. If they failed, it would be used as evidence that women simply couldn't meet the demands of Special Forces operations. If they succeeded, it would open doors for future generations. The exercise began at 0400 hours with a pre-dawn equipment check and final briefing. Sarah's team would be the second to attempt the rescue, allowing them to observe the first team's approach and adjust their tactics accordingly. The first team, led by a former Marine named Rodriguez, would assault the compound using conventional tactics designed to test basic competence and coordination. Sarah watched from the observation post as Team Bravo began their assault. They moved with professional precision, using textbook tactics to approach and breach the compound. But the defending instructors had prepared for conventional approaches, and Team Bravo found themselves facing pre-positioned machine gun nests, explosive traps, and coordinated defensive fire that pinned them down before they could reach their objectives. The exercise continued for 45 minutes before Team Bravo was forced to withdraw with heavy simulated casualties. They had successfully rescued 2 of the 4 hostages, but at a cost that would have been unacceptable in a real operation. During the debrief, the instructors criticized their predictable approach and failure to adapt when their initial tactics proved ineffective. Sarah's team had 30 minutes to make final adjustments to their plan before beginning their assault. Miller gathered them in a circle and reviewed their strategy one final time. "We've seen what conventional tactics accomplish against this defensive setup," he said quietly. Martinez's analysis was correct. "We need to do something unexpected if we want to succeed where Bravo failed." The assault began with Sarah and 3 teammates moving to positions where they could observe the compound's defensive responses to diversionary attacks. Using suppressed weapons and coordinated timing, they began engaging defensive positions from long range, creating the impression of a sniper team preparing for a conventional assault. The ruse worked perfectly. The defending instructors repositioned forces to counter the perceived sniper threat, leaving the blind spots that Sarah had identified inadequately defended. Miller led the main assault team in a rapid approach that took advantage of the repositioned defenses, reaching the building's exterior without taking casualties. Sarah's role shifted as planned when the main assault reached the building. She moved from her overwatch position to join the entry team, carrying specialized communications equipment that would allow coordination between the assault elements and any hostages they encountered inside. The building clearing operation was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in training. The instructors playing hostile roles were using live ammunition with reduced charges, creating noise, smoke, and psychological pressure that made every decision feel life or death important. The building layout was more complex than their intelligence had suggested, with multiple levels, hidden rooms, and defensive positions that had been prepared specifically to challenge the assault teams. Sarah found herself separated from the main assault team during the initial floor clearing, trapped in a stairwell by defensive fire from above. Rather than wait for support that might not arrive in time, she used her communications equipment to coordinate with Miller's position and developed an improvised plan to neutralize the defensive position. Using flashbang grenades to create temporary disorientation, she advanced up the stairwell in short rushes that minimized her exposure to defensive fire. Her martial arts training proved invaluable when she encountered an instructor in close-quarters combat, allowing her to neutralize the threat without using lethal force and continue her advance. When she reached the second floor, Sarah discovered 2 hostages in a room that hadn't appeared in their intelligence briefings. The hostages were guarded by instructors who were positioned to make rescue extremely difficult. Any conventional assault would likely result in simulated hostage casualties that would constitute mission failure. Sarah made a decision that required her to trust completely in her training and instincts. Rather than calling for backup that would take time to arrive, she used her position and specialized equipment to create a distraction that drew the guards away from the hostages. When they moved to investigate the apparent threat, she was able to secure the room and begin hostage evacuation procedures. The operation continued for another 20 minutes as the team systematically cleared the building and secured all 4 hostages. When the exercise concluded, Sarah's team had achieved complete mission success with minimal simulated casualties, a result that exceeded the performance of several all-male teams that had attempted similar operations. But the real test came during the comprehensive debrief that followed. For 3 hours, instructors questioned every decision, analyzed every tactic, and evaluated every aspect of the team's performance. Sarah faced particular scrutiny regarding her decision to advance alone up the stairwell and her improvised hostage rescue technique. "Martinez," Master Chief Peterson asked during the tactical review, "explain your decision to continue the assault when separated from your team's support." Sarah had learned that honesty and tactical justification were the only acceptable responses. "I assessed that waiting for team support would allow the defensive position to be reinforced and potentially compromise the entire mission. My communications equipment allowed me to coordinate with the team leader, and my training provided me with the skills necessary to neutralize the threat and continue the mission." "Your assessment of the hostage situation showed good tactical thinking," Lieutenant Commander Hayes added. "But your execution required you to act independently without direct supervision. In a real operation, that level of independent action could create coordination problems that might endanger the entire team." "Understood, sir." However, the hostages were in immediate danger, and conventional rescue tactics would have resulted in casualties. I believe the risk of independent action was justified by the tactical situation. The questioning continued for another hour, but Sarah sensed that she had successfully defended her decisions and demonstrated the tactical competence required for Special Forces operations. More importantly, her teammates consistently supported her performance and acknowledged her contributions to the mission's success. When the debrief concluded, Colonel Thompson announced that final evaluations would be completed within 24 hours, and results would be announced to all candidates simultaneously. Sarah spent that night knowing she had performed to the best of her abilities, but uncertain whether her best would be sufficient to earn her place among the elite warriors she had come to respect and admire. She was no longer the underestimated girl from New Mexico. She had become something new, a warrior who had proven herself capable of succeeding in the most demanding environment the military could create. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen. The morning of the final announcement arrived with an atmosphere so tense it seemed to crackle with electricity. Sarah had barely slept, not from nervousness about her own results, but from the weight of knowing that whatever happened in the next few hours would affect far more than just her personal future. The experimental program that had allowed women to attempt special forces training was being watched by military leadership, political officials, and media representatives who would use today's results to determine the future of gender integration in elite military units. Colonel Thompson entered the briefing room with a folder that contained the evaluations that would determine the fate of every candidate present. Behind him walked a collection of senior military officials that Sarah had never seen before, their presence indicating the significance of what was about to unfold. The tension was so thick that the sound of chairs scraping against the floor seemed unnaturally loud. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thompson began, his voice carrying the weight of history. "What you have accomplished over the past 12 weeks represents one of the most rigorous evaluations ever conducted of human physical and mental capabilities under extreme stress. The standards you have been held to are identical to those applied to every Special Forces candidate in the history of this program. No accommodations have been made, no standards have been lowered, and no consideration has been given to anything other than your demonstrated ability to perform at the level required of elite warriors." Sarah felt her heart racing as she looked around the room at her fellow candidates. Of the original 43 Navy SEAL candidates, 31 remained. Of the original 13 women, only 3 had made it to this final evaluation. The numbers told their own story about the brutality of the selection process. "The results I am about to announce," Thompson continued, "will determine not just your individual futures, but the future of this program and the military's approach to gender integration in special operations. The stakes could not be higher, and the performance standards could not be more demanding." He opened the folder and began reading names. Each announcement brought either the joy of success or the devastating reality of failure after months of the most demanding training any of them had ever experienced. Sarah listened as names were called, watching teammates she had come to respect learn whether their dreams would be fulfilled or shattered. "Martinez, Sarah," Thompson called, and Sarah felt the entire world narrow to this single moment. Everything she had worked for, everything she had endured, and everything she hoped to become depended on the next words out of his mouth. "Congratulations. You have successfully completed the Special Forces Selection Program and have earned the right to continue to advanced training." Sarah felt a rush of emotions so intense that she had to focus on maintaining her composure. Relief, joy, pride, and vindication crashed over her in waves. But she remained at attention, knowing that this moment was about more than just her personal achievement. Around the room, she could see the faces of her teammates, some showing surprise, others showing satisfaction that bordered on pride. But Thompson wasn't finished. "Martinez, your performance throughout this program has been exceptional in ways that extend beyond simple task completion. Your tactical thinking, leadership under pressure, and ability to contribute meaningfully to team success have demonstrated that individual capability is not determined by gender, size, or previous assumptions about what warriors should look like." The announcement that followed surprised everyone in the room, including Sarah herself. "Based on your performance during the final evaluation exercise, and in recognition of your tactical competence and leadership potential, you have been selected to participate in advanced counterterrorism training, a program that traditionally accepts only the top 5% of Special Forces candidates." Sarah felt her knees nearly buckle as the implications sank in. She hadn't just succeeded. She had succeeded at a level that placed her among the most elite candidates in the program's history. The quiet girl from New Mexico who had spent her entire life being underestimated had just been recognized as one of the most capable warriors in one of the world's most demanding military programs. But the real test of what she had accomplished came immediately after the formal announcements ended. Master Chief Peterson, The instructor, who had been most skeptical about women in the program, approached her with an expression she had never seen from him before. "Martinez," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. When this program started, I believed that physical standards would prove that women simply couldn't meet the demands of special operations. I was wrong. You've shown that the most important qualifications for this job, tactical intelligence, mental toughness, and the ability to function under pressure, have nothing to do with gender." Lieutenant Commander Hayes joined the conversation. "Your performance during the building clearing exercise was some of the best tactical decision-making I've seen from any candidate, male or female. The way you adapted to unexpected circumstances and accomplished mission objectives using unconventional methods demonstrated exactly the kind of creative thinking we need in special operations." But it was Miller's acknowledgement that meant the most to Sarah. Her teammate and squad leader, who had evolved from skeptic to supporter over the course of their training, offered her something that transcended simple congratulations. "Sarah," he said, using her first name for the first time since they had been teammates, "I want you to know that when we're deployed together, I can't think of anyone I'd rather have watching my back. You've earned the respect of every person in this room through your performance, not through special consideration or lowered standards. You belong here." The media attention that followed the program's completion was intense and sometimes overwhelming. Sarah found herself representing not just her own achievement, but the potential for women in military service that extended far beyond special forces. She was interviewed by journalists, profiled in magazines, and invited to speak at military academies about her experience. But what she discovered during those interviews was that the most important aspects of her story weren't about breaking gender barriers or proving that women could do anything men could do. The real story was about how years of being underestimated had prepared her for an environment where unconventional thinking was actually an advantage, where persistence mattered more than peak performance, and where the ability to succeed differently was more valuable than the ability to succeed in traditional ways. "People ask me if I think I succeeded because I'm strong for a woman," she told one interviewer. "But I think I succeeded because being underestimated my entire life taught me to rely on intelligence instead of intimidation, strategy instead of strength, and persistence instead of power. Those aren't female characteristics or male characteristics. They're warrior characteristics that anyone can develop if they're willing to do the work." The three women who completed the program went on to distinguished careers in special operations, but their individual achievements were less important than what their success represented. The experimental program became a permanent pathway for women to serve in special forces, opening opportunities that had never existed before and proving that capability was determined by character rather than gender. Sarah's advanced counterterrorism training led to deployments in some of the world's most dangerous locations, where she consistently demonstrated the tactical competence and leadership skills that had earned her recognition during selection. Her approach to operations, methodical, strategic, and focused on achieving objectives rather than dominating opponents, proved highly effective in environments where conventional tactics often failed. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came 5 years later, when she was invited to return to the training facility as an instructor. Standing in front of a new class of candidates that included both men and women, Sarah represented something that had never existed before, proof that the elite warrior community could evolve without compromising its standards or effectiveness. The person standing next to you during training might not look like what you think a warrior should look like, she told her students during their first day of training. They might be smaller than you, quieter than you, or approach challenges differently than you. Your job is not to determine whether they deserve to be here. Your job is to help them become the best warrior they can be, just as they will help you become the best warrior you can be. The program that had been designed to test whether women could meet the demands of special forces operations had actually proven something more important, that the military's most elite units became stronger when they embraced capability regardless of where it came from or what form it took. Sarah Martinez had entered the program as a woman trying to prove she could succeed in a man's world. She completed it as a warrior who had proven that the world of elite military service was big enough for anyone willing to earn their place through dedication, competence, and an unwillingness to accept limitations imposed by others. The quiet girl from New Mexico who had spent her life being underestimated had become something unprecedented. Not the first woman to succeed in special forces, but the first warrior to demonstrate that success in the most demanding military environments came from character, intelligence, and determination rather than conforming to traditional expectations about what strength should look like. Her story became legend not because she had broken barriers, but because she had proven that the barriers had never really existed for people willing to redefine what it meant to be unbreakable. In a world where being underestimated had always been her greatest challenge, Sarah Martinez had transformed it into her most powerful weapon. She had not just defeated the 301 Navy SEALs who had trained alongside her. She had earned their respect, their trust, and their acknowledgement that the most dangerous warriors were often the ones that nobody saw coming. And, in doing so, she had changed not just her own life, but the future of military service for generations of warriors who would follow in her footsteps.